In a landmark decision that has sent shockwaves through Washington and beyond, the United States Supreme Court has blocked President Donald Trump's sweeping tariff plan, delivering a decisive check on presidential power and reaffirming the judiciary's crucial role in the American system of checks and balances. This ruling isn't just about taxes on imports. It's a fundamental statement about the balance of power between the president and Congress, and a reminder that no branch of government operates in isolation. The tariffs, enacted through executive orders, imposed a baseline 10% tax on nearly all goods entering the country, affecting everything from electronics to clothing and food. Some nations faced even higher rates, sparking international tensions and concerns about potential trade wars. The administration justified these sweeping measures as a response to a national emergency, arguing that urgent action was needed to protect American industries and jobs. The legal battle was swift and intense, with lower courts divided on the issue and businesses left in limbo, unsure how to plan for the future. It wasn't until the Supreme Court stepped in that a final resolution was reached, bringing clarity to a chaotic situation. The decision provides immediate relief to businesses and consumers who had been bracing for higher prices and supply chain disruptions. But while the ruling settles the immediate dispute, it raises new questions about the limits of executive authority, the future of U.S. trade policy, and how Congress and the President will navigate these powers going forward. In this video, we'll break down what happened, why it matters for the country and the world, and what could come next as the dust settles on this historic Supreme Court intervention. A tariff is essentially a tax placed on goods that are brought into a country from abroad. When a product crosses a border, the government can charge an extra fee, which is then paid by the importer. This fee is usually added to the price of the product, making imported goods more expensive for consumers and businesses. Tariffs are often used as a tool to protect domestic industries from foreign competition, giving local manufacturers an advantage. They can also serve as leverage in international negotiations, or as a way to pressure other countries to change their policies. Traditionally, the power to set tariffs rests with Congress, which debates and passes laws that determine how and when tariffs are applied. However, President Trump's 2025 plan marked a dramatic departure from past practice, both in its scale and its ambition. Under this plan, he imposed a sweeping 10% tax on nearly every product imported into the United States, affecting goods from almost every country around the globe. For some nations, the tariffs were even steeper, with certain products facing rates as high as 50%, sending shockwaves through international markets and trade partners. The administration justified these sweeping tariffs by arguing they were necessary to address the persistent U.S. trade deficit, which they claimed was harming American workers and industries. Another stated goal was to combat the flow of fentanyl and other illicit drugs into the country, linking trade policy to the fight against the opioid crisis. To implement these tariffs, the administration invoked emergency powers under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, a law designed to give the president authority to act swiftly during national emergencies. This law allows the president to regulate international commerce in times of crisis, but it had never before been used to justify such broad and sweeping tariffs on imports. Legal experts and historians quickly pointed out that previous uses of IEPA were far more limited, raising questions about the administration's interpretation. The administration's creative legal argument was that the word regulate in the law included the power to tax imports, even though Congress had traditionally held that authority. This bold and controversial interpretation quickly became the central point of a series of legal challenges, as opponents argued it gave the president too much unchecked power. The stage was set for a historic Supreme Court showdown, with both sides preparing for a legal battle that would have far-reaching consequences. Ultimately, the outcome would determine whether the president could unilaterally reshape American trade policy on such a massive scale, or if those powers would remain firmly in the hands of Congress. Opposition to the tariffs was immediate and broad, uniting states, businesses, and consumer advocates. States argued the tariffs harmed their economies and violated the Constitution by bypassing Congress's authority to tax. Businesses, from small importers to educational toy companies, faced skyrocketing costs and existential threats. Plaintiffs like VOS Selections and Learning Resources argued they were being punished for issues beyond their control, such as China's fentanyl policies. Their core argument, the president cannot create taxes out of thin air, only Congress can do that. They claimed the administration was misusing emergency powers, endangering jobs, and destabilizing the economy. The coalition asked the courts to restore the constitutional balance before irreparable harm was done. Their lawsuit set the stage for a pivotal test of executive authority. The legal fight centered on whether IEPA gave the president the power to impose sweeping tariffs. The administration argued that a massive trade deficit was a national emergency, justifying broad executive action. They cited past cases and claimed regulate in IEPA included setting tariffs. Challengers countered that IEPA never mentioned tariffs or taxes, and that only Congress can impose such measures. They invoked the major questions doctrine, arguing that Congress must be explicit when delegating such significant powers. The challengers also argued that a long-standing trade deficit isn't a sudden crisis warranting emergency powers. They said Congress passed IEPA to limit, not expand, presidential authority over trade. The Supreme Court was left to decide whether the president had overstepped constitutional boundaries. The Supreme Court sided with the states and businesses, ruling that the president lacked clear authority to impose the tariffs under IEPA. The majority opinion emphasized that the power to tax and regulate foreign commerce belongs to Congress, unless delegated in unmistakable terms. The court drew a sharp line between regulating imports and taxing them, rejecting the administration's broad interpretation. The justices were skeptical of using a chronic trade deficit as grounds for emergency powers. The ruling reaffirmed Congress's central role in economic policy making and blocked the president from using vague statutes to impose massive taxes. The decision dismantled the legal foundation of the tariff plan and clarified the limits of executive power. The tariffs, though short-lived, caused real pain for businesses and families. Companies faced impossible choices: absorb huge costs or pass them to consumers, risking bankruptcy or lost customers. Educational toy makers warned that price hikes would put learning tools out of reach for many families and schools. The average household faced an extra $1,200 to $2,800 in annual costs, hitting working families hardest. The uncertainty chilled investment, disrupted supply chains, and triggered retaliatory tariffs abroad. The Supreme Court's ruling halts this economic spiral, but the scars will take time to heal. The episode shows how trade policy decisions can ripple through every corner of American life. With the Supreme Court's landmark decision, the immediate task for the government is to begin unwinding the tariffs that have been in place and refunding businesses that were affected. This process will be complex, involving coordination between customs officials, trade agencies, and the private sector. Many companies are now preparing claims for refunds, while supply chains adjust to the new legal landscape. The decision has sent ripples through the business community, with many hoping for greater stability and predictability in trade policy. The ruling forces the White House to seek new legislation for any future large-scale tariffs, effectively returning the power to impose such measures back to Congress. This shift means that any sweeping changes to trade policy will now require open debate and approval by lawmakers, rather than being enacted by executive order alone. While the president still retains some targeted trade tools, the broad use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, for imposing tariffs, is now off the table. The executive branch will need to work more closely with Congress to address future trade challenges, marking a significant change in how trade disputes and emergencies are handled. This decision marks a major recalibration of executive and legislative power over trade, restoring a balance that many legal scholars argue was intended by the Constitution. It sets a precedent for how far the executive branch can go in using emergency powers for economic policy. Lawmakers are now likely to play a much more active and visible role in shaping U.S. trade policy going forward. Committees will hold hearings, experts will testify, and bipartisan negotiations will become central to the process of crafting new trade laws. The court's ruling reinforces the constitutional design: only Congress has the authority to impose broad-based taxes and tariffs. This principle, rooted in Article 1 of the Constitution, ensures that such significant economic decisions are made through democratic processes and public accountability. The future of American trade will now be forged through debate, negotiation, and compromise, rather than unilateral executive action. This new era promises more transparency and input from a wider range of voices, reflecting the diverse interests of the nation. The Supreme Court's decision is a defining moment for American governance and the global economy, signaling a renewed commitment to constitutional checks and balances and reshaping the way the United States engages with the world on trade.